You know, in a civil fraud trial that was just jam-packed with drama, the judge boiled it all down to one simple thing: the arithmetic. So today, we're going to do the math and see exactly how it led to a verdict with consequences that reach far, far beyond just money.
So let's start in the courtroom, where things are about to get wild. The judge, absolutely furious, slams his gavel, and he's not just silencing the defense. He's striking their entire argument from the record. So what could possibly be so outrageous that it threatened the very integrity of the court?
So what was the reason for all this outrage? Well, it boils down to this number: $2 billion. That's the staggering amount the judge had already ruled was just fabricated on official financial statements. And look, this wasn't just some oops, a little miscalculation. This was a number that demanded a serious explanation.
So the prosecution's case here, it wasn't just about a few numbers being, fudged here and there. No, they painted this picture of a deliberate, long-term business model that was basically built on a foundation of lies. So let's break down the key pieces of evidence that convinced the court. Okay, so at the very heart of this entire case is this one super crucial document: the Statement of Financial Condition. Now, you can think of it like a company's financial resume, right? It's what they give to banks to get these massive loans. And here's the kicker: if that document is a lie, then every single dollar they borrowed is seen as, well, the fruit of a poisonous tree. Let's dig into the numbers.
All right, first up, Mar-a-Lago. Now get this. When they were looking for loans, the property was valued as high as $739 million. I mean, that's a pretty hefty sum. But then, when it came time to pay taxes, that value just plummeted to only $18 million. It's like they had two completely different sets of books for two completely different purposes.
Yeah, that is not a rounding error. That is a jaw-dropping 2,000% difference. And the prosecution's argument was just dead simple. You can't have it both ways. You just can't tell the taxman your property is worth almost nothing to lower your bill, and then turn around and tell a bank it's worth a king's ransom to get a huge loan. This wasn't framed as some simple mistake. Oh no, this was presented as a calculated strategy.
Okay, next up, we've got the Trump Tower triplex apartment. And honestly, this is where the prosecution's case gets almost brutally simple. The financial statements claim the apartment was this massive, sprawling 30,000 square feet, but in reality, it's just under 11,000. And look, square footage, that isn't a matter of opinion, right? It's a hard fact. You can literally check it with a tape measure.
And that one little lie, or actually big lie, about the size had a massive, massive consequence. Just by claiming the apartment was nearly 3 times its actual size, its value was inflated on paper by over $300 million. I mean, think about that. This wasn't just a bit of exaggeration. It was a lie that literally created hundreds of millions of dollars out of thin air.
So, okay, you're faced with this absolute mountain of damning math. How on earth do you respond? Well, the defense came forward with two main arguments, both designed to convince the court that, hey, despite what the numbers look like, no actual fraud happened here.
All right, their first argument, and you could say it was pretty audacious, was this theory of a victimless crime. They basically argued that since the banks who gave out the loans were paid back, with interest, by the way, nobody was actually harmed. So if there's no victim, there's no crime. That was the idea.
And their second line of defense? Well, it was a disclaimer. Some fine print buried deep inside those financial documents. They argued this clause essentially told the banks, hey, don't trust these numbers. You got to do your own homework. They were hoping this would be their get-out-of-jail-free card.
But the prosecution, oh, they were ready. And they didn't just counter these arguments with some fancy talk. No, they completely dismantled them using basic legal principles. And this is the real killer, the bank's own words.
So to take apart that whole victimless crime idea, the prosecution brought up this really crucial concept: market integrity. And the idea is pretty simple, actually. The law isn't just there to protect one single bank or one single lender. It's there to protect the fairness of the entire financial system for all of us.
And they used a really simple analogy to make their point. Imagine a driver speeding, like 100 miles an hour through a school zone. Now, by sheer dumb luck, they don't hit anybody. Can that driver really argue they didn't break the law? Of course not. The reckless act itself is the crime. And the prosecution said the exact same principle applies here. The act of lying to the market is the crime, no matter what the final outcome was.
So that brings us to the defense's other big claim, that these sophisticated banks, like Deutsche Bank, would never be naive enough to just blindly trust a borrower's numbers. They do their own homework, right? But The prosecution had a little surprise waiting for them.
And this is the moment the defense's entire argument just crumbled. I mean, after days of claiming the banks didn't even care about these statements, the prosecution pulls out this internal bank email, the smoking gun. In the bank's own words, it says the loan was approved based directly on the financial strength of the guarantor, the very same financial strength that was completely made up in those phony statements.
So that one sentence proved it all. The lies had a direct, measurable impact, and they mattered to the tune of $168 million. This is what's called the ill-gotten gain. It's the interest payments the defendant allegedly saved by using those false numbers to get better loan terms. It's literally the financial benefit of the fraud.
Okay, so now what about that disclaimer argument? To tear that one down, the prosecution used another really simple but powerful analogy. They said, look, you can't sell someone a worthless rock, tell them it's a diamond, and then try to protect yourself with some fine print that says, oh, by the way, this might actually be a rock.
And the judge? He agreed 100%. He ruled that in the eyes of the law, fraud vitiates everything, which is a fancy way of saying it poisons the whole deal, makes it totally void. You just can't use a disclaimer to shield yourself from a deliberate lie. In fact, the judge saw them relying on that clause as pretty much an admission that they knew the numbers were bogus all along.
So, with both pillars of the defense just completely shattered, the court then turned to the consequences. And let me tell you, they are severe. They go way beyond just a simple financial penalty.
Now, the single biggest threat here is something known as the corporate death penalty. And that is not just a figure of speech. Under New York law, the state actually has the power to literally dissolve a business for persistent fraud. They can just cancel its license to operate in the state. Gone.
So, here's how the penalties break down. First, there's a massive financial fine. Then, there's something called disgorgement, which basically means you have to give back every single penny of those ill-gotten gains. And then, on top of all that, there's the potential corporate death penalty, the dissolution of the company, and having a court-appointed receiver come in, seize the properties, and sell them all off. So, at the end of the day, what's the bigger picture here? Well, this case was really a test of a fundamental principle of any fair market, that the rules of finance and the objective reality of numbers have to apply to everyone. It doesn't matter how rich or powerful you are, because without that, the entire system just loses all its credibility.
And that leaves us with one final and I think crucial question. When fraud on this kind of scale is proven, not by some complex legal theory, but by simple, basic arithmetic, is a financial penalty really enough to restore trust? Or does true accountability require something much more drastic, like the corporate death penalty, a permanent ban from the marketplace? I mean, what does it really take to stop this kind of behavior from happening again?